Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Roberts, and I'm the Director of Business Development for GOED Omega-3. And GOED is the global organization for EPA and DHA long-chain fatty acids. And we are an organization focused on protecting and promoting the benefits of EPA and DHA in the industry. Today's presentation is going to touch a little bit about a regulatory environment, and then I'm going to present some new data that we prepared for this, especially for this meeting on consumer data on the UK and France and how it relates and compares to the US and Chinese market. So to get going, I searched a little bit about the history of omega-3s in Europe and found some interesting old report. And as early as the 1700s, German researchers began studying cod for the treatment of rheumatic arthritic conditions. And also cod liver oil, because of its high vitamin D, led to early success in treating rickets. So that was like way before there was any science to support that. And kind of fast forwarding to the 1900s, cod liver oil gained wide recognition among medical doctors for its health benefits. And during World War II, it was used to increase children's basic nutrition. You can see from that symbolic old, looks like an advertisement of some sort, the mother, the child, and infant all consuming omega-3s from that codfish. More recent, though, in 2004, the industry's been under attack figuratively from the EU hygiene regulation. The Farm and Fork regulation was put the future of the omega-3s in jeopardy, and the approach was designed to eliminate dangerous viral and microbial threats in the food chain. And if passed, it would have cost many jobs, hundreds of millions of dollars in refinery revenues, and also potentially affecting 60 to 90 million consumers and usages. So GOED, an effort led by GOED, we collectively submitted an economic impact study with the EHPM, which is the European Federation of Health Products Manufacturers, and Marine. And in the outcome, a revision was passed that worked for all the parties, which allowed the continuance of the fish oil business in the EU. This slide's actually based on a response based on all claims submitted to EFSA this past year. For those of you who are wondering how popular the omega-3 business is in the EU, you can see here that they've recognized omega-3s as to a greater extent than any other nutrient. And it's not surprising, the body of science includes more than 2,400 published clinical studies on omega-3s in the last 30 years. So the evidence is there, and it's a very popular product. Jumping into a little bit of health claims. We got a thumbs up on Article 14 claims, which are children's health claims. DHA for normal visual development in infants up to 12 months of age, and 2 claims for maternal intake contributing to the normal eye and brain development of the fetus and breastfed infants. And this past May, the EU gave us a green light on these Article 13 claims, and they are now permitted to be used throughout the EU. For DHA alone, EPA and DHA together, but not for EPA alone, as the Commission's understanding is there is no pure EPA products on the market. But these are now permitted to be used in the EU. We also have some pending Article 13 claims that have been put on hold pending the tolerable upper limits assessment. For DHA alone, for the maintenance of normal blood pressure concentrations of triglycerides, and for EPA and DHA for the maintenance of normal blood pressure and the maintenance of normal blood concentrations of triglycerides. For tolerable upper limits, the BFR is responsible for this kickstart of this German initiative, which the European Commission requested a review of all existing science on upper limits. To proactively participate, GOED assisted by commissioning 2 reports, an intake assessment and a comprehensive hazard characterization. EFSA responded that there was not enough science to establish this upper limit. What was surprising, though, is EFSA declared that there was an absence of safety concerns for up to 5 grams per day was feasible. GOED agreed that there was not enough sufficient evidence, but was surprised by EFSA on their opinion of the 5 grams per day. So GOED asked for the EC for clarification from EFSA for the basis of those decisions, and we're waiting for further inputs. But the note is the 5 grams per day is not an upper limit, and we are concerned that it may be interpreted as one without the market. And the market has grown because the industry is collaborating, basically. The GOED monograph standard was developed in 2002 to ensure that omega-3 oils reaching consumers were both safe and of high quality. So moving on, I'm going to talk a little bit about some consumer data. And so how does education and consumer awareness play a successful business strategy in the EU? We need to make consumers more aware of omega-3s, first of all. And GOED has begun to perform some case studies on consumer awarenesses. This is based on nutraceutical applications. We wanted to find out who is the functional or the food supplement omega-3 user and who is the functional food user. We've done a number of studies in the US. We've done 3 or 4 studies and we got about 3,100 respondents. In France and UK, just before this event, we had about 1,000 respondents, and China also has 1,000. But I'd like to say that China is not really statistically significant, as we really focused on the urban areas, because the rural areas are somewhat, there's not a lot of internet connections. There's also, those areas are quite poor. So we really are focusing on what's called, and it's been detailed as the consuming class, which actually is about 300 to 400 million people, which basically is the size of the United States population. Other limitations to our data is that in France, the omega-3 supplement rate was so low that we really had to dig far and deep into the supplement numbers to get meaningful information, to have so we need larger sampling sizes to get some meaningful data. But nonetheless, we did get some. So we looked at a number of criteria, demographic, psychographic, and behavioral. But based on the time I have today, I'm going to focus on demographic. And so the real question is, how do users of omega-3 differ from non-users? The good news is that awareness is pretty close to universal in all the countries. UK's at 95% awareness, France is at 94%, United States is at 93%, and China is at about 84%. At the end of the day, we can say that the vast majority of the consumers have awareness of omega-3, although they may not have heard down to the level of EPA and DHA, but they know about omega-3s. So when we throw up the numbers, what's interesting is the unawareness of omega-3 is about 73 million consumers from these 4 countries, and that do not know about omega-3. And that number would be much higher, of course, if we did count the Chinese rural population. But really, who are these unaware consumers? One of the things we constantly find is that age is a primary factor. So here we go. In France, each one of these dots, by the way, represents 100,000 people. And in a country like France, this is where you see an exception. You don't really see a trend here. As you look at different awareness groups, it basically is equivalent from age to age that the awareness of omega-3s is pretty consistent. But if you look at the UK business, you can start to see a trend. In the 18 to 34 age bracket, you see about 300,000 consumers that don't know about omega-3. And when you get up to 55, you got about, I think that's about 1 million people. So there's a little bit of a trend that you see increasing with the UK, which is a little surprising because, and by the way, this is statistically significant, even though you only see a few dots here. And the reason why you only see a few dots here, or why it's so small, is when we look at the United States and China, you'll see a lot more dots. But actually in the US, you see the exact opposite. You see the millennial and the X-gen, what we call, which is basically 18 to probably 30 now, that do not know a lot about omega-3s. And plus, but although they are connected to the internet, and the internet is really where most omega-3 or a lot of science is, or not science, but information about omega-3s. And so we're not reaching them very well. So that's kind of a concern. And in China, you see the exact opposite trend. The young population is where you see the most unawareness. Oh, I'm sorry, that was... the young population is where you see the most unawareness in America. In China, there's just a lot more dots, for one, and you see the same age trend, which is also very interesting. The data is much like the U.S., where the youngest age groups have the highest amount of non-awareness of omega-3s. Let's look at usage. France actually stands out here in food. This is food supplements, by the way. 10% of the consumers in France say they use omega-3 supplements, whereas in the UK and the US, it's pretty level at around 30%. That is one of the clear areas of differences where you see some of the cultural divergence between the countries. What's interesting is that the next slide I have is on functional food usage. And for functional food usage, the US stands out. It doesn't stand out as much as the French supplement business, but if you ask a lot of ingredient suppliers why that is, they'll say that the U.S. has had a hard time adopting omega-3s into foods. For a long time, experts looked at the EU market as the world's leading functional foods market, with high penetration in things like yogurts and spreads. And now what you're seeing is China is really taking off, and everybody is focused there in the functional food market. Now, the differences in countries and how they educate are somewhat diverse. In China, you have a basic problem in that 26% of consumers say they don't know the benefit for omega-3s. So they can't even identify heart health or brain health or any single benefit. And 40% say that they are unaware of omega-3s, which I should clarify, this is from the non-user group. But the group that stated that they don't take omega-3s. So there's some very basic education needed to be done here. Start getting information in their hands, and you'll slowly start converting some of these users into the category. In the U.S., it's a little bit more complex, and my doc doesn't recommend it. I don't take supplements in general, or I already get enough in my diet. Whether that is true or not, we don't know. But you can see from the message that we need to bring. You need to bring these groups, and this is how they differ from country to country. In the UK and France, the doctor plays a very important role. 24% of British non-users say the doctor doesn't recommend it, and in France, 30% of non-users say the doctor doesn't recommend it. The other interesting thing is that in the UK and France, there are only two countries where price. This is the only two places where price paid a key significance in their use for omega-3s. What you see in the marketplace is that France, omega-3 products tend to be more expensive and other places than other places like the US and China. But in the UK, you can get extremely low-priced omega-3 products, but you still see that 25% of the consumers say it's too expensive. Not sure how to translate into market success, but it's an interesting finding nonetheless. Let's look into gender. It's about 50%, 50% in all the countries. But here again, France clearly stands out. And from the supplement side, these are very low numbers. As you remember that from the earlier slide, that only 10% of consumers use or take dietary supplements. But the functional food side is actually a meaningful number. As you can see, that it all skews female. So, and they really stand out. So we feel there's a big opportunity to educate male or bring more males into the category. And there aren't a lot of products targeting males at this point in time. Let's look at age. Age is one area where I mentioned earlier from the unaware population where you see some divergence culturally. When you look at usage rates, you also see some divergences. In the UK, you effectively don't see a clear trend for either food supplements or functional foods. The usage is really flat across all those ages, within give or take 3 to 5%. But just because usages are different, that doesn't mean that that's where all the consumers are. Because each of these population buckets have different population sizes that you can see, and you can see more than 60% of users in functional food and food supplements are over the age of 45. Those two vertical lines represent that. And you can see that they both fall into the 40 to 45 age bucket. This chart looks much different than other countries, so maybe just remember what this looks like. But you can see the vast majority of functional foods and food supplement users are in this older bucket. In France, and remembering that the rates are really low, so the 18 to 24 bucket, you have less than 4% of users say that they use omega-3 supplements. And even in the 55 plus bucket, you have less than 15% saying they take omega-3 supplements. And what's very different in the US and Canada, that is very different in the US and Canada and other places, but what you do see in functional foods is higher. And if you sort of add a trend line, you can see the trend is going upwards as you get older. So the more likely you are at a later stage to start taking food supplements or functional foods. And you see a trend where the vast majority of users happen to be in the older bucket. And the average age tends to be more on the right side of this chart, more so than you saw in the UK in the previous slides. But what you can see from both is that the average age is similar in both, and that you don't see much difference between the functional food and the food supplement user. Now, in the United States, you see a completely opposite trend. Dietary supplement usage increases with age, and functional food decreases in age. I mean, this is where you see a completely different chart. The average age for an omega-3 functional food user is around 40 years old. And the average age for an omega-3 dietary supplement user is around 50 years old. Supplement users or usage increases with age until you get to your late stages, and then it drops off pretty significantly. We're not sure why that's happening, but it seems to drop off consistently. In China, it's pretty much similar to the U.S. The older you are, the more likely you are to use a dietary supplement. And the younger you are, the more likely you are to use a functional food. Although you'll notice the steep drop-off at the 45 age bracket and older. It's really because of the Cultural Revolution that happened in World War II. And they have completely different attitudes, which is based on when the whole restructuring of that country was happening. So in China, you actually have the youngest average of ages in any country. Around 30 to 40 years old. And you can see in the shape of this distribution that the populations of users is very different than other countries. It's much different in shape. And if we look at economic status is an important predictor of the omega-3 supplement usage in almost every country. The higher your economic status, the more likely you are to use omega-3s in just about every country. The exception here is France, where the trend is not statistically significant. And again, that is because of the sample size, most likely. But China is the only one where you see this big impact. China, you actually are 4 times more likely to use supplements if you are in the upper class than you are at the lower class. And again, this pertains to the consuming Chinese urban population. Whereas in the U.S., you are 70% more likely to use supplements if you are in the upper 1/3 of incomes than if you're in the lower class. In the UK, it's about 1.4 times. With functional foods, this trend is not observed in any other Western nations. Economic status has no bearing on your functional food usage in the US, UK, or France, although in China it has everything to do with it. That effect that you saw in supplements is even greater. So you're 4.7 times more likely to use a functional food if you're in the upper class as the lower class in China. This is actually relationship status. This slide did not pick up, but so this is a relationship status point of view. In the UK, relationship status has no impact whether single, married, or divorced in either supplements or functional foods. However, in France, for some reason, if you're single, you're least likely to use omega-3s. Somehow that leads to marriage where you're more likely to use omega-3s, which would make sense. You're more responsible. You have people are more dependent on you. But what you're also seeing is it increases again when you get divorced. So maybe there's something for the French to consider in that. It's interesting. In the U.S., you see a little bit more increase when you get into the committed relationship, and then it decreases when you get divorced or widowed or just older. Maybe it just doesn't matter anymore. China is pretty much the same trend holds through. It starts low. You take it more when you're in a committed relationship, and then it drops off again. That could also be because of the older age groups and the issues we talked about earlier in China with the restructuring. So what can we learn from these consumer segments? There's a lot of education needed. There's still education. There's an education challenge in the EU. All the countries are different, which makes it confusing on how to approach education. But really, it's going to take the entire industry to convert non-users to users, rather than just the sector within a sector within the market, like manufacturers or ingredient suppliers. So it's going to be a collaboration from many different areas that really start moving the education in the EU. We know consumer education will help drive the market, and it'll be a significant driver for the success. And GOED is in the beginning stages of launching a consumer education program, which you'll hear more about later this year as that unfolds. So what can you do? Certainly taking an action and becoming an ambassador of the omega-3 business. Join an industry group that's focused on developing the market. EHPM is the European Health Products Manufacturers, represents about 2,000 manufacturers. Marine is a Norwegian Seafood Federation who works on regulatory side of issues. GOED, we work to promote consumption of EPA and DHA when we enforce, and while enforcing quality and ethics standards. So these are all opportunities for you to engage and collaborate with and help move the ball continued forward. Just a little bit about both your EHPM and Marine, what they do from a regulatory standpoint and who they represent. And then this is what GOED offers. It's taking an active role in the omega-3 industry through the direction of the industry, access to global market research and ingredients, as well as finished products and now consumer data. And by the way, we're planning to do 9 or 10 more consumer reports or driving consumer data in various countries across the globe. But it's really a commitment to omega-3 and the public safety by following the voluntary monograph. I think that we get a lot of our members because they want to have third-party validation. When we go to places like China or different parts in Asia, they know there's a problem with quality, or there at least has been, and so they want support, they want quality, they want to stand behind the science, and so these are some of the ways you can participate in the industry and get more connected and really move the ball rolling, keep the ball rolling. And that's it. So happy to answer any questions. Thanks very much for coming.